This exhibition was organized by the Neue Nationalgalerie in Berlin, Germany. And all of the works of art in the exhibition come from that museum. So this exhibition provides us with the opportunity to see the rise of totalitarian government, of the Nazi regime in Germany, from a German vantage point, which is so important for us, that we learn how other countries respond and react to the rise of governments that may not be serving their best interest. This first section of the exhibition focuses on artists who could be identified as expressionist, meaning that they were interested in reflecting expression and emotion in their art. They were not necessarily interested in showing something that was pretty or dealing with ideas that the Impressionists in France were interested in, with light and color and atmosphere. So these artists provide us with some of the earliest 20th century challenges, works of art that they knew were difficult, that they knew might make us uncomfortable. And I think one of the challenges that we have in the 20th century and up to the present is that many of us don't like to be made to feel unpleasant or challenged in our ideas. And so these works of art require the viewers to step out of our comfort zone and learn a new way of seeing the world inspired by these artists. So many of these artists, starting in 1904, began to experiment and tried to make images that were unlike anything that had been seen previously, and see works of art as an opportunity to explore emotion and passion and do something that was very different from what photography had provided. For most of European civilization, there was a progression of art making towards realism, towards representation. And with the arrival of photography in the 1830s and 1840s, suddenly a camera could create a realistic depiction of anything we could see. And if a machine could do that, why would artists try to do better? So artists tried to do different. And that's the sort of example of works of art that we see around us. So if you feel uncomfortable, if you feel like you wouldn't necessarily need to look at a work of art like this again, the artist has been successful. But what we need to do as successful thinkers and human beings that are celebrating the creativity of our fellow humans is to try to take a step towards the artist and understand that the feelings that we feel being exposed to work like this are valid, even if those feelings are negative or might even be seen as repulsive. And that is one of the challenges with contemporary art, with modern and contemporary art, that it's not always about making something that's pretty or making something that is easy for us to understand. Now, for most of these works, they play a very major role in the first half of the 20th century, because these were the sort of works that, with the rise of the Nazis in Germany, Adolf Hitler came to power in 1933, and immediately he began to disparage these artists and the work that they created. And he called this work degenerate, basically subhuman, that these were works of art that were not worthy of humanity. And so all of these artists suffered greatly government persecution. And there was another type of artist that also was declared degenerate. And those were artists who happened to be Jewish. The Nazis felt that the Jewish community was the source of all problems in Germany. And Adolf Hitler was very successful at finding one enemy and blaming everything on that enemy. And these works of art represented that enemy and represented everything that was not good in Germany, everything that was anti-German. So I hope that you will have the opportunity to come back and spend more time looking at these objects. There are a few in other sections that I would like to spend more time with. And please feel free to grab a copy of the gallery guide where you can read more about all of the objects in the exhibition. Do you see this portrait of the young boy? Can any of you get some sense of the personality of that young boy? This was painted in the 1920s, and the young boy looks very angry in the painting. He looks very frustrated. He has blonde hair, blue eyes, and is wearing a tan shirt. And for me, with my ignorance, I made assumptions about who this person might be. We had the ambassador for Germany here at the museum last week who looked at that, and he said even his hair is parted on the side of his head that would indicate that he could have later become a member of the Hitler Youth. And that was my immediate assumption. So I immediately leapt to conclusions based on what this young man looked like. The fact is that this young man named Rolf was an incredible athlete. He loved playing, running, skiing, swimming. He was a sharpshooter. So can you imagine asking a 11-year-old boy to sit still to pose for a portrait? What would an athletic young child, how would they respond to that? Angry, frustrated, looking just like that. Actually, Rolf's mother was Jewish. His father was Norwegian. And so the parents decided that he should be sent for his safety when the Nazis came to power to Norway. As an athlete, he was an incredible skier and he was a sharpshooter. He became one of the most effective insurgent fighters against the Nazi troops in Scandinavia, and was incredibly effective at driving Nazis away from their intended targets. Rolf then became, during the war, one of the most successful resistance fighters in Scandinavia. At the end of the war, an organization was founded with the hope that there would never be another world war like World War II. That was the United Nations. And Rolf Schroeder was one of the first employees of the United Nations from Scandinavia. He was assigned to the territory of Palestine, where he was assigned as one of the workers to help establish the homeland for Jews in what we now call Israel. So my expectations and my assumptions based on the way that he looks is such a perfect example of why every human being needs the opportunity to tell their story, to be themselves, and we should not judge. And an exhibition like this gives me so many of those opportunities. Yes, some of these individuals are angry. This man here is very angry. And he painted this self-portrait when he came home from a meeting of the Communist Party in Germany, in Berlin in particular. And for me, I grew up in an era where the communists were always the bad guys because we in the United States were not communists. And yet for so many people, working people in Germany in the early part of the 20th century, the Communist Party represented for them an opportunity to earn a living wage, to have a few days off every month, not to be exploited by their bosses. So his understanding of communism is very much different from my understanding of communism growing up during the Cold War in the United States. And he had just come back from a meeting of the Communist Party in which the Nazis killed 10 members of the Communist Party and wounded 17 that night by shooting into a meeting. So the artist portrayed himself holding a stinging nettle, a prickly plant, and he's grasping it with all of his strength between his fingers to show his strength, to emphasize his tenacity and his unwillingness to simply be subjugated by others. So these works of art were created for an entirely different purpose than the expressionist paintings that we saw earlier. These works of art, part of the new objectivity movement in Germany, were created with the hope that it would show the real Germany, the real people celebrating the livelihood of German, or the vitality of German life in the 1920s and 30s. And the woman here in the painting with the black frame is known as the German Mona Lisa. She's very famous in Germany. And she is out for a night of partying during the Weimar Republic. So she is there in a club, basically, and she is showing how modern she is, wearing modern fashion, with her hair cut short. She's got French champagne behind her, and on the table is her makeup. She's comfortable enough with the idea of wearing makeup that she has the makeup on her table, and she's smoking Camel cigarettes, United States cigarettes, to show just how cosmopolitan she is. So these works, these portraits of the individuals, can reveal so much about German society, particularly in the 1920s and 1930s. And so much of this society was very quickly stamped out with the rise of the Nazis that felt that this sort of lifestyle and these sort of individuals should not be considered German. There were so many diverse movements of art in Germany in the first couple of decades of the 20th century. And one of the areas that German artists were really pushing most dynamically and most creatively in was the area of abstraction. And most of those paintings that we had seen in the two previous sections would have been displayed in people's houses with dark walls and heavy draperies and overstuffed furniture, what I might call a Victorian environment. And the artists in this section felt that in Germany, they could create a world that was completely unlike any interior decoration or any living space that they had ever experienced. So most of these artists in this section were either students or instructors at the Bauhaus School, which was a school of modernity. And most art schools in Europe and the Americas at the time would teach painting, sculpture, printmaking. But at the Bauhaus, they wanted to teach all of the arts and encourage Germany to see everything that we did in life as an opportunity to live in artfulness. So architecture was taught, textiles was taught, industrial design, to design furniture and teapots and lampshades in the most modern way possible. And we can see with the painters and sculptors in this section the way that they are showing the world in an entirely different, from an entirely different vantage point. So here we can see a village in Germany. And we might be able to recognize particular details of that village, but I don't know if I would recognize where that was. And for these buildings, I don't even know if I would know how to get into them. Where's the front door? So the artists are taking from what they observed, extrapolating from what they observe, and creating a work of art that is not about the village. It's a work of art in and of itself. So this is not a story about that village, it is a painting. And I know that some of us might have an immediate discomfort looking at abstraction or looking at works like this that are not exactly the way that I would see the world. My grandmother would say, "What's that supposed to be?" And the only real answer that we can provide for works like this is it's supposed to be a painting, because it's not a German village. It's a painting inspired by a German village. And that idea of art as an independent, freestanding, intellectual idea is a real challenge for some of us, because we want art often to be about something or to tell us a story. We expect art often to be like television, where we can simply sit there and we are told everything that we need to feel. So the artists of the Bauhaus shake us out of that comfort zone and take us to a world where we have to participate. We have to be willing participants in the interpretation of the work. And the other thing that's important is that most of these artists would be fine if we interpret these objects in a way different from the way that they intended. So we might not read the same story in a work of art as the artist thought that they were painting, and most of them would probably be okay with that. But again, it depends on us being confident in our convictions and confident in the way that we interpret these objects. And sometimes we really would prefer to be told what the right answer is rather than have to guess or come up with our own answer. That's one of the challenges that we have when we are growing up, that we're told there's a right answer to most questions. With a work of art like this, there is no right answer, there are just a lot of questions. And the way that we come to answer those questions is valid. But in Germany, with the Nazi movement that was rising and, as I said, came to power in 1933, when in January 1933, Adolf Hitler became the Chancellor of Germany, there was not a celebration of ambiguity. There was very much a commitment to right and wrong. And so most of these artists were determined to be wrong, because this didn't tell a German story. It didn't tell a heroic German story. And so the Nazis shut down the Bauhaus, and many of the artists in this section of the exhibition left, either fled to Amsterdam or Paris or London or New York City. And ultimately, so many of the Bauhaus artists settled in the United States that I feel it gave rise to what many people in the world of arts call the American century, the time when the United States became the leaders of world creativity. And it was thanks to the Nazis determining that all of these artists were not German enough that they became American, and they elevated our nation and helped all of us create much more expansively and much more innovatively. So the stories that these artists tell through their personal biographies is deeply emotional to me, and it's deeply emotional to many of their families as well. And so Lionel Feininger, the artist who created this painting, became one of the most important teachers in New York City and later in Philadelphia in the United States, training the new generation of majorly important United States painters and sculptors. So we can see the origins of some of who we are in the United States in these rejected artists from Germany. What a gift. What an unintended gift. So this section of the exhibition includes some of the most heroic individuals I can imagine. Individuals who understood that it was more important to tell the truth than to survive. It was more important to remain true to who they were as creators and citizens than to simply bow to the powers of an authoritarian ruler. This sculpture of the fallen man was created by an artist who was originally asked to create a heroic monument to the mythological leader Siegfried. Siegfried was a mythological figure, and in Germany he became a stand-in for everything that was good and noble and heroic. But the artist, in the middle of World War I, felt that there was a very different story going on in Germany and wanted to create a very, very different image. So the fallen man represented for the artist his feelings about what was truly happening and the psyche of Germany at that time. So having this sculpture contrasted with this sculpture is a perfect example of what the Nazis felt was degenerate and anti-German, and what the Nazis felt was heroic and the best of Germany. I don't know what sort of contrasts we can draw, but if we were to describe these two sculptures, they're both oversized nude males. But they're so different in the intentionality and the way that we observe them. The artist who created this figure was one of Adolf Hitler's favorite artists, and he was commissioned to create dozens of larger-than-life-size male and female figures to show the heroicism of modern Germany, of German life under the Nazi regime. There's something about this that is so bland to me. Now I'm expressing my opinions, and the wonderful thing about art is you can always have opinions, and the artists expect you to have opinions. But something about this figure is so uninteresting to me because there seems to be nothing behind the perfect proportions. There seems to be no emotion, there seems to be no intellect, no feeling, and I don't really get a sense if this is the ideal Germany as to what Germany is. Whereas a work that is so completely different, created in the previous World War, is so loaded with emotion from the artist's perspective, but also I'm sure each one of us might view this sculpture in our own personal way. So that makes it an incredibly dynamic work of art, because each of us can load into this sculpture our own feelings. We can see in this whatever story that we want, and the artist would have really appreciated that. In direct contrast to these large figures is a painting behind me that was, the artist started making this painting in 1945, just as word was beginning to come out in Germany as to what had been going on in the concentration camps, where Jews, by the hundreds of thousands, by the millions, had been incarcerated and exterminated. And this artist felt that he had to express his compassion and his horror. So he made a painting that, again, like many of the works that we've seen, is not easy to look at, but it so deeply expresses the human condition and the potential for emotion to be expressed visually. So on the left side of the painting, we see an individual questioning, wondering what is to come of the future. On the right side, up above, we see a family with a mother and a father and a child, all with a smudge of yellow on their lapels. The Nazis forced Jews to wear a yellow Star of David on their lapels. So here the artist did not feel that he needed to even outline the star. Just a yellow smudge would be enough of an indicator that we all then could fill in the rest of the story. But a family, wide-eyed, terrified, not knowing what was going to happen. And then in the central panel, the revelation to so many people in Germany and the rest of the war of the horrors when the concentration camps were discovered by the Allied troops. And so there are individuals in the concentration camp that are represented. And then to the right side of that panel, 3 children raising their arms or exposing their arms, and their arms have small red dots, reflecting their numbers, the number tattooed on their skin of their incarceration. And the little girl to the far right looks like she's trying to peel the skin off of her arm to remove that number. But the artist provides us with an opportunity for some sense of hope. And in the lower panel of the painting, we can see men and women working in the resistance, giving a sense that there is something that we good human beings can do to say, no, we're not going to put up with this. We're going to fight. So the lower panel represents the resistance, just like the resistance of that young boy in that second section of the gallery. He grew up to be a young man that fought in the resistance and said, I will not put up with these horrors that I feel are inappropriate. And the important thing that I feel about this exhibition is that it was put together by scholars in Berlin, in Germany, who wanted to tell all of the truth of what happened in their country. They wanted to share with us in the United States what can happen if we don't look after our country, if we don't care for each other, if we don't welcome challenging ideas that sometimes we might not agree with. But those ideas presented, in this case, by artists, give us the opportunity to step outside of our comfort zone and see the world differently. So the 4 curators in Germany joined with a curator at the Kimball Art Museum in Texas, organized this exhibition with the hope that we can see Germany as a humane situation of incredible struggle. And that struggle is what we do as human beings. And the struggle is what artists give to us. It's one of the reasons why I've dedicated my life to celebrating artistry, because artists take us places that I never would have taken myself. And artists encourage us to understand things differently. So in an exhibition like this, and I hope that you'll come back and spend more time here, each one of these works of art can take us on a massive journey, and a journey of experimentation, of exploration, and a journey of ideas. And that's what we do here at the Albuquerque Museum. We focus on history and art and allow people to understand New Mexico and Albuquerque in a different way. And we also bring exhibitions like this that are so generously lent to us from the National Gallery in Berlin. And we can share this with New Mexico. It's our hope, and as Bibi Baloira said in her welcoming remarks, it is our hope that exhibitions like this will be an opportunity for everyone in New Mexico, regardless of ability or regardless of challenge, to explore and learn something new. The Albuquerque Museum is here for everyone. It is owned by everyone. It is owned by all of us.